So this is our professionalism in the future, responding to the drivers of change. What we're hoping from this one is to have continued success in the future. It's important to consider how the drivers of change might affect the future of professionalism. That's what I talked about this morning. And the objective is to consider the views of professionalism and how these drivers will affect it in this rapidly changing world. So we have three different perspectives with our panelists. First, we have Ed Waitzer. And Ed has this perspective of the legal and accounting profession. He has experience as a senior lawyer. He also was he was an OSC, Ontario Securities Commission chair, and a governance visionary. So he was involved with the accounting profession as a member of a standard-setting task force in the past, with one of our legacy bodies. He also worked with the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. So that's why he got dragged into this a little bit. Mr. Waitzer is a senior partner with Stikeman Elliott, whose practice focuses on complex business transactions, and he advises on a range of public policy and governance matters. He is a professor and holds the Jarolowski Dima Mooney Chair in Corporate Governance, as well as being the director of the Hennick Center for Business and Law at Osgoode Hall and the Schulich School of Business at York University. He served, as I said, the chair of the Ontario Securities Commission from 1993 to 1996, and as vice president of the Toronto Stock Exchange until 1981. Now, Sylvia's perspective, she is a lawyer who works with an accounting firm, KPMG at the moment, or, well, recently, just after those conversations earlier today. And so I think of Sylvia as living one of the drivers of change, and really in the world of technology. She is in the risk consulting practice at KPMG and is the National Data Protection and Privacy Leader. She has more than 15 years' experience providing strategic privacy risk management and compliance and advisory services, serving both the public and private sectors. She advises executive teams on data-driven digital strategies to support major business transformations in alignment with new regulation, policy, and governance trends. It's a busy world right now. And third, so we've kind of gone from an overview of the accounting and the legal profession with Ed, because as you know, the legal profession as well has had some challenges with technology and how it's changing it as a profession. Then Sylvia living a driver of change. And then Bob, he was at the CPA Canada Board of Directors during the unification process. And so the CPA Canada and all its members went through a major change 5 years ago. It's our birthday this month. And he was at a very big part of that unification process. So he brings that perspective of what it means to go through a big change and then looking forward what it means. So Bob was the previous chair of CPA Canada Board of Directors, helping us to achieve those key objectives, providing direction for governance and management. He joined the board on January 2013, and he has served both as vice chair 2013 to 2014 and chair 2014 to 15. He was the co-chair of the National Steering Committee, overseeing the formation of CPA Canada in 2012. This was after he retired from his position of finance at the Capital Regional District in 1986 to 2013. 27 years at Capital Region? And that's the government bodies, regional government. And he had various senior management positions in the area of financial risk management, treasury, asset management, and taxation. So we don't have to talk about audit in this part. Everyone will be happy. He's definitely shown his professionalism in the many other advocate and roles he's supported the accounting profession. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panel. We're going to start with Ed, as I said, and will give us a viewpoint of the profession heading into the future and professionalism in its role.
Thank you again, Karen and Len, for inviting me to participate, and thank all of you. It feels like this should be sitting around a table instead of this sort of awkward, because so many of you in the room have been thinking about these issues at least as long as I have. So I'm flattered to participate in the discussion. I thought I'd break my short comments down into, and hopefully provocative comments, into three pieces. First of all, kind of thinking about what defines professionalism, and then thinking about some of the opportunities and some of the challenges or disciplines that I think will be imposed on the profession. And thinking about what distinguishes a profession, for me, breaks down into three pieces. One is a mastery of a body of knowledge and skills that is to be used in the service of others. The second is being able to respond to a public expectation that professionals will uphold the highest standards of ethical conduct. And I'll come back to that when I talk about challenges. And then the third is a legal norm, which is described as a fiduciary relationship with clients, and increasingly beyond clients to others in society, which on the one hand imposes an obligation to put the interests of others ahead of our own. On the other hand, allows for and enables self-regulation both at the personal and professional level. So that for me would frame what distinguishes a profession. My critical comment, and we can get into this in discussion if you like, and I think Steve may have made some similar remarks this morning, and I'm sorry I couldn't make it, is ironically, over the last 20 years or so, I think regulation has profoundly dumbed down the profession. It has, not intentionally, but very effectively discouraged the exercise of professional judgment and made discussions about the exercise of professional judgment very awkward between professionals and clients. So I'll put that out there if people want to pursue it. Let me then turn to what Karen described as the drivers of change, what I think of as opportunities for the profession. And for me, it starts with a growing awareness of systemic risks in society. And when I think of systemic risks, those are risks that A, can't be diversified away from, and B, could be the source of contagion that extends beyond a particular actor in society and across markets. So people often talk about them as externalities. This growing awareness of systemic risks, I think, leads to what I think of as opportunities. I know CPA Canada thinks about them as opportunities. I know ICAEW, which has been another thought leader, thinks about them as opportunities. Other people may, opportunities and challenges are sort of two sides of the same coin. One is a very rapidly changing view of materiality, whether under securities law or elsewhere. So climate risk is a great example where 20 years ago the SEC appeared as amicus opposing an environmental group's motion to put a environmental related proposal on a proxy circular on the basis that it wasn't material, it wasn't relevant to the business. You wouldn't find a single person in the building today, the SEC building, who would take the same view. And all of those who were opposed, many of whom actually are now active in accounting matters, have changed their minds. Secondly would be a recognition that sustainability issues typically aren't reflected in financial statements. And at least today, when they are reported on, and they are reported on increasingly, tend to be disclosed using boilerplate or using metrics which are close to being useless for investors So again, that's an opportunity for the profession. The need to address matters which are contingent or speculative. The need to acknowledge that the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, which is a real challenge for auditors. But I think is a real opportunity for the profession in terms of being trusted advisors and trying to assist in providing meaningful, comparable information. The need and increasing resort to what I would call probabilistic analysis of plausible future scenarios, often described as scenario analysis. This is sort of the basic point of the task force or task force on climate risk disclosure report, which has been widely now endorsed both on the issuer and investor side and by central banks around the world. And the need for forward-looking measures that aim to assess an organization's vitality, resilience, capacity for future growth, reinvention, the kinds of metrics that we're beginning to see, for instance, in regulated financial institutions that focus on institutional culture. And again, huge opportunities. I was out in LA last week and met with some folks. It's called Starlight Trust Sciences, but they're artificial intelligence folks who are now marketing software to assist organizations in tracking cultural issues. So a simple example of what they do is they monitor all email traffic within an organization. And if someone typically copies 5 people on their routine emails and all of a sudden drops 4 of those from their routine emails, that's a flag. And they're just, those are the kinds of things they're looking for in their analytics to try to keep track of culture. You know, the Roman philosopher Seneca famously noted that institutions flourish slowly but fail rapidly. And I think that's true today more than ever. While the ramp-up speed of new businesses has accelerated and is accelerating in a digital age, firms are also failing much more quickly. I saw a recent Boston Consulting Group study that showed that only 44% of today's industry leaders have held their positions for at least 5 years, which is down from about 80% half a century ago. In a world that is characterized by interdependence and disruptive change, past performance is generally recognized now as a poor indicator of future success. So much of what we have been focused on in our reporting may be less relevant today than it was, but flip the other way around, there's so much more that we can focus on, and we have the tools to focus on. So I think there's both an opportunity and a need to look ahead, and this is something that the CPA Canada has been a thought leader on for a long time, in order to avoid falling off Seneca's cliff. Preventable surprises should be part of an auditor's remit. So those are the opportunities. The challenge and the discipline, in my mind, and now I'm putting on my legal hat, is that in a time of what I think of as thin political markets, and what do I mean by thin political markets? If you look across mature democracies in the world, it has become harder and harder to get things done. There are just so many forces and counter forces. In that environment, we see courts increasingly being prepared to step into the breach and use concepts like reasonable expectations, what I referred to at the beginning of my remarks, almost like polyphylla, filling in gaps that emerge with respect to, for example, fiduciary and professional standards. So I know it doesn't seem like this to many of you. I would say accountants and auditors have had a pretty easy ride with respect to liability issues historically. Think of Hercules, which was the leading decision, and then all of a sudden, in the last 10 years, there was the Castor Holdings case, which was a private company case, and then earlier this year, and I'm biased because I was acting, the Livent decision, which I think could easily become an inflection point on auditor liability issues in Canada. My expectation or my prediction would be, and this goes beyond the audit profession or the accounting profession, is that at some point courts are going to start imposing what I think of as public governance duties. And this goes back to my remarks that responsibilities of professionals go beyond their clients increasingly. And so when I think of public governance duties, it's courts in the right fact situations broadening both standing to bring claims for relief and broadening the scope of remedies, recognizing the need to impose discipline, again, in particular facts, on professional conduct or on the conduct of those who you provide professional advice to that imposes externalities. And you can see that trend already. The notion of limited liability in corporate law is a bit of an anachronism, even though the statutes all still say limited liability. And the willingness of the courts to look through the corporate veil and impose liability on directing minds and increasingly those advising the directing minds, I think is a trend that is likely to accelerate. Again, I see this as both an opportunity and a challenge for a profession that enjoys a statutory franchise on standard setting and quality assurance and accounting standards. And because of that, occupies a favored position as trusted advisor to enterprises. It's sort of with power and authority comes responsibility, and the opportunity is to be proactive in exercising that responsibility, which will only increase opportunities for the profession and reinforce both the relationship with clients and standing in society.
Thank you, Ed. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Karen for inviting me to be on this panel, and I'm absolutely delighted to be on this panel with two very distinguished panelists. But my story is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about a number of the concepts and principles that you've just raised, but in more of a practical context. So as Karen mentioned, I am a lawyer by training. I've been in management consulting for almost 15 to 20 years. So if I'm not working with accountants, I'm definitely serving or advising them in the roles of internal auditors, and some of them are CFOs, CIOs. And really my story is that the future of professionalism is still bright. There's lots to look forward to, and it's very exciting, especially in the world of privacy, which is my domain. And lots has happened recently, especially if you've been watching the headlines with Facebook and the new EU regulation that's referred to as the General Data Protection Regulation. And it's been a real joy to be seeing these things because I've been in this business for 15 years, as I've said, and my job has always been to do right by the client. So in the advisory business, I've seen a real shift in thinking and a real shift in a cultural mindset with respect to how do we do privacy? How do we manage data? It's less of a compliance, tick the box exercise, and it's more of a proactive risk management play where we are educating our clients to understand the value and the benefit of building in the right privacy and security protections into the system architecture, into day-to-day practices, into the culture of a company that really values ethics and privacy, because I think that those two things go hand in hand. And trust me, it's a hard pitch. when you're dealing with small budgets in the world of privacy, the CPO never has budgets. They're always pitted against the security budgets. And privacy isn't a very sexy thing. It's always tucked under a privacy security assessment review because cybersecurity is top of mind. 60% of budgets of a CIO or a CISO go into proactive risk management for cybersecurity reasons. So for me, it's been a real pleasure to see that mind shift from tick the box compliance to let's look at the ethical considerations around data management. And it's always been a hard sell because everyone's looking to the return on their investment. And it's really hard to quantify trust. Highly regulated entities like the banks who want to go digital, and their mantra and their goal is to be the digital bank and to look at the customer from a 360 view or perspective. They get it. They understand that privacy risk management is an exercise of brand. It's reputational risk. The thing that keeps a CPO, a chief privacy officer, up at night is the prospect of being on the front page news, doing something creepy with their customers' data, right? So how do you put parameters around ethical and responsible use of data? It's really hard to measure. So I wanted to tell you that there's been a real shift in the way I've been managing my clients and the messages that I've been giving. And there's more of an appetite to receive that message today. And I think the driver for all of this is data-driven technologies. We're seeing the use of artificial intelligence. We're seeing driverless cars. We're seeing the Internet of Things. We are interconnected in so many ways that we've never been before. And I don't even think that regulations are fit for purpose when it comes to regulating emerging technologies. Now, the Europeans, I think, have got it right. With the coming into force of the GDPR on May 25th, their vision and purpose in drafting up the GDPR was to enable the citizens, EU citizens, to have their rights and freedoms and their values protected, because in the EU, privacy is not just a consumer protection issue. It really is about the rights and freedoms and the values of society as a whole. And it's very different from the approach we've been seeing in North America. It's let's let the market decide, especially in the US. Let's leave it to self-regulation. And then you have the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which proves the Europeans' point. We can't leave these things to regulation. And in fact, if we just do the baseline, which is what the data protection laws aim to do, it doesn't measure up. It's not prescriptive enough to tell companies and organizations what to really do with their data sets. So let me give you a bit of background about the GDPR, because I think it's really important to understand what the foundation is. It's about transparency, it's about ethics, and it's about accountability. Accountability means that there has to be lawful and fair processing of the data. What does lawful and fair processing mean? It means that you have to have consumer consent. Consumers have to understand what you're doing with their data. And transparency means less of legalese, notices in terms of conditions and privacy policies. It's really telling your customer that, hey, this is what I collect about you. This is what I'm going to do with your information. This is how I share it with third parties. And we're never going to compromise that, because we understand that in you trusting us with your data, you've given it to us so we can derive more insights about you and serve you better, and we don't want to compromise that. So I really think it's important to think of data protection and privacy in the way that the Europeans have tried to think of it. Now, I wanted to tell you about a concept called privacy by design. 3 years ago, and people thought I was crazy, I partnered up with a former regulator. Her name is Dr. Ann Kavukian. She was a privacy regulator here in Ontario. And she was out preaching the concept of privacy by design and security by design. What does that mean? It's such a simple philosophy. It means building the right protections into the technology up front. Don't retrofit your systems. Do the right thing. Be ethical and smart about data use. Let the data be smart about itself. And now this concept that was pioneered here in Ontario and Canada, it made its way into European legislation. So Article 25, privacy by design and privacy by default, collecting minimal amounts of data sets, being transparent about it, being accountable, making sure that your vendors and suppliers who deal with information on your behalf, they're also responsible. So it's about vendor risk management and proactively doing your due diligence. And 3 years ago, it was challenging for us to tell our clients to do the right thing, to be ethical and responsible with your data. And again, only the highly regulated entities would understand that, because That's the stuff that keeps the executives up at night. It's now become a board-level priority, given the massive amounts of cyber breaches and data issues that are out there. But what we found is lately more than ever, it's coming around, and we're getting feedback from clients to say, we're not in the business of managing regulators anymore. We want to do the right thing for our client. We understand why privacy by design is so important, because trust is hard to quantify. Brand reputation is really hard to quantify. Everyone just looks at shareholder stocks that plummet after a data privacy breach, the operational costs, the financial consequences of being sued. There's privacy class action lawsuits out there, and it's becoming a trend here in Canada. We're adopting US-style litigation. And now with the GDPR coming into force, companies are liable of up to 4% of their global turnover if there is a fine or a penalty. And there's going to be a proactive risk management approach. The enforcement culture is real. They're going to come after companies who don't understand the concept of transparency and aren't doing right by their clients. So we launched this program called Privacy by Design Certification, where we've had a number of Canadian companies who wanted to do this, not because it was a matter of law, not because it was a legal benchmark, but because they wanted to do it as a privacy best practice, because it was the right thing to do. So we had companies like TELUS, whose CEO understands privacy and gives the tone from the top, where he's passionate about the issue and understands that when we launch a geolocation service offering, even if we don't collect personally identifying information, we just want the public to know that they can trust us. So we've had this with Ashley Madison as well, where the regulators came after them. There's 3 regulators that issued heavy-handed compliance orders, and at that time they didn't have to comply, but they wanted to do the right thing. So they went through the whole privacy by design exercise, where we operationalized a number of principles in terms of what it means to be ethical and responsible about data use. So it's about being transparent, it's about respecting end user privacy, it's about short notices, it's about being proactive rather than reactive by having a privacy strategy, by embedding privacy by design by default into the architecture and into the culture of a company. And we operationalized all of those principles by coming up with 90 requirements and controls, and we actually leveraged something called the Generally Accepted Privacy Principles, which is something that the CPA came up with. There was a bunch of accountants around the table who brainstormed, well, what does a principle look like in practice? How do we operationalize something when we look at data from a people, process, and a governance and a technology point of view? So we did just that, and we have a number of really good, ethically responsible companies, I would say, doing the right thing. And now it's going to be law in the EU. So I would say that that's a success story, and we can look to the Canadian example as, you know, we actually have responsible, ethical companies not acting like the corporation. I don't know if you've read The Corporation by Joel Bakan. He makes a very good argument that, you know, there's all sorts of externalities, and the corporation is a pathological entity that's only interested in shareholder profits, and they never do the right thing. Well, by that philosophy, you've got Facebook to look at, and are they really going to change their information handling practices? Are they going to be that pathological corporation? I'm not really sure about that. Maybe they're window dressing when they're saying they're going to protect information and live up to the spirit of the GDPR, or they're going to say that they're going to move all of their data into the US until the US lawmakers come up with stricter data protection laws. But I think there is a way, an ethical way, a responsible way to do the right thing, and to build the trust with your customer.
First, I'd like to thank Karen and Len for inviting us. This is a great range of individuals in this panel, and I'm already recognizing some differences in our perspective as we present ourselves. Professionalism in the future and responding to drivers of change is a great topic. I think we're very well established and positioned to now start considering what's our role as accountants going to be in the future. When I listened to the opening comments by Stephen, great challenge for us to consider for a moment the decline of professionalism. It's not the perspective that I was taking, and it caused me to stop and say, yeah, but there's 2 different perspectives, or a number of different perspectives on how we view professionalism. From my point of view, I'm looking at it as an opportunity for our profession to adapt and adjust how we deliver professionalism, both as a profession and as individuals, going forward as we deal with different drivers of change. Never before has the Canadian accounting profession been such a highly valued and respected member of our country. We're now providing even better than we have in the past in the areas of influence, advisory, and advocating, standard setting, and building collaborative professional relationship. But this runs parallel to the challenges of living in a period of such dynamic change. We have the explosive impact of technology on business, increasing regulatory requirements, expanded expectations of employers and the public, and the globalization of the economy. It's vitally important that the profession that we realize this opportunity and make the commitment to fully engage in this period of change, both domestically and internationally. As Canadian CPAs, individually and collectively, our real value is in delivering our skills and expertise in the utmost of professionalism. It's how we build a reputation as experts in what we do. It's how we earn the trust and respect of all our stakeholders, including business, our members, and the public. I'd like to add my comments from the perspective of the profession as a whole. I'll look at what is professionalism and how can we use it to our advantage as we respond to the drivers of change. I'd like to share this perspective of somebody who spent a number of years in the area of governance. For the past 25 years, I've served on committees and boards in the Canadian accounting profession. The incentive for me has always been to make a contribution to the best profession around. But more importantly, it's been an experience of working with like professionals who are equally motivated, professionals acting with professionalism, people who genuinely want to participate, people who want to serve with integrity, and most importantly, people who want to make an impact on the legacy of the accounting profession. For the past 30 years, I've watched the profession morph from a traditional accounting profession of 3 designations in Canada, with 3 different cultures and 3 different market niches, with traditional accounting practices of transaction processing, financial reporting, and tax preparation, with students, employers, and business community often seeing us as dealing with yesterday's and today's financial business, and with a public seeing us as bean counters and tax preparers. We've been respected, but we've been hardly known as dynamic leaders of the future. That traditional accounting landscape is history. Currently, in terms of what does CPAs do, we've been in transition from the traditional accounting for more than a decade. In response to expanding business needs and societal expectations, we've broadened our scope of influence to be working in areas such as defining strategic direction and creating strategies, researching and producing reference-based information, tax planning, advisory and influence, resource allocation, and serving increased roles of serving the public interest. In terms of who are we as CPAs, we've seen a growth in the accounting profession across all sectors of the economy. Accountants are no longer known or identified with being in public practice. In fact, less than 20% of our members are in public practice. We now work in the C-suite and the executive branch, HR, technology, marketing and communications, and creating and consulting on policies and reference material. The footprint of the Canadian accounting profession is continually expanding. In terms of who is the profession, the single biggest event to impact the Canadian accounting profession was unification in 2013. We entered unification to consolidate a profession and clearly demonstrate self-governance. Unification of 3 legacy professions brought together over 200,000 members across the country. We created a self-regulated profession with a single set of standards, single branding and messaging, single code of conduct, and a single culture for the profession. We work collaboratively with all stakeholders to better support business, not-for-profits, the government, and serve the public interest. Today, we've accomplished those objectives by having increased relevance, global recognition, and widespread influence. Our house is in order. We're stronger, more unified, and now prepared to make a difference. We have a profession that is strong in numbers and experience. We're well respected in all corners of the country. We have influence across a broad spectrum of the Canadian and international landscape. We have a state-of-the-art accounting profession in the recently minted CPA Canada designation and the profession. We're now perfectly positioned to anticipate, and initiate the next stages of change in the profession. Going forward, our true value will be in our ability to seize the opportunity and be proactive in making an impact on the future. Success will be determined by our ability not only to anticipate and respond to emerging topics, but in how we respond to the largest and most lasting, to how we respond to make the largest and most lasting impact. CPAs will need to adapt our behavior and how we conduct ourselves, our professionalism. In dealing with the change in the future, attributes of professionalism we might consider include specialized knowledge, competencies, honesty and integrity, respect, accountability, self-regulation, and how we deliver ourselves with our public image. By continuing to evolve as a profession, by being proactive and anticipating societal needs of the stakeholders, by engaging and participating with other thought leaders and professionals, by practicing sound professional behavior and judgment, we will be relevant and make an impact on the future. We will need to demonstrate that we have the competencies and skills expected of a profession. Our professional lives cannot be static. We will need to continue to upgrade our competencies and skills as individuals. We will need to be relevant and informed of emerging practices and knowledge bases. We will need to be professional, diligent, current, to earn the full attention and respect of our stakeholders. In responding to drivers of change, the accounting profession will evolve and change significantly over the next decade. The global economic and business landscape is expanding with unprecedented uncertainty. The only constant is change itself. We'll need to be flexible and adaptive to anticipate and initiate change in the business world around us. Our profession will be impacted by a number of diverse drivers of change, each complex, integrated, and ever evolving. We can expect our future to see changes in technology, economic, societal, environmental, and geopolitical issues. We can expect to see the increased demand for regulatory requirements. We can expect to see increased demand on corporate governance for oversight. And we can expect to see an increased need to serve the public interest. Following are some examples of how I believe we need to seize an opportunity to position ourselves best as leaders in the future. In the areas of technologies, the spread of technology advances and their impact on business will impact the specialized knowledge and competencies of the professional accountant. From historical transactions to real-time reporting, from statistics to analytics and more predictive analysis, from skilled labor and production staff to automated processes and robotics, from in-house information processing to greater connectedness and cloud processing of financial and non-financial information. The opportunity facing the profession is that we work both with and ahead of the technology curve. Tomorrow's professional accountant must have skills and competencies of integrating complex processes and increasingly more complex change management. In terms of societal expectations, as business evolves, so will the expectations placed on the profession. We live and work in an information age of guidelines, best practices, and emerging areas of thought. New and emerging topics will require that we be ahead of the curve and provide relevant guidelines and reference information. In the past, the profession has been known for supporting the accounting-related information base with a 20-question series of publications on audit committees, fiduciary duty, internal audit, selecting a CEO for the board. CPA Canada Oversight and Governance Group with Gord Beal and Gigi in our attendance today have recently produced more topical papers on climate change briefing, corporate social responsibility, what do external auditors do, board oversight for not-for-profit collaboration. Who would have thought 10 years ago that climate change would be ranked in a significant way that it is as a driver of change? Yet in a period of heightened awareness and scarcity of resources, It's a topic of considerable consideration for both business and society. This is typical of how emerging issues are unfolding and how we'll need to adapt ourselves in the future to be able to respond to them. The opportunity facing the profession is that we continue to anticipate and conduct research into emerging business issues. We need to be seen as a respected provider of reference material for the public, particularly those in corporate governance. The opportunity for the profession is also faced with to develop a wider range of competencies of professional accountants, so to deal with a more diverse range of stakeholders. As business organizations become more complicated and complex, accountants will be expected to look beyond the numbers and add value in different ways. Another area is strategic planning and performance management. Increasingly, the area of strategic planning and performance management will continue to be an effective driver of business operations in the future. It's no longer a periodic activity of going back and looking at your strategic plan and updating your key initiatives. Business organizations will need to be nimble and flexible to update strategies in response to changing markets, more onerous regulations, or emerging technologies. It's the only way that we're going to be able to sustain our competitive advantage. I've been 3 years removed as chair, not removed, but away from serving as chair of CPA Canada board. And I went back to have a look at the key strategies of the board today. And just that short period of time, there's been a major refresh of the focus of what the board is delivering. And that's a very good indicator of how responsive we've been to the environment around us and how we need to continually change what we're doing as we're working ourselves in our roles. So the opportunity facing the profession is to ensure accountants' competencies include a mindset to continually reevaluate and not take the status quo as a standard. We must be motivated to question, revisit, and amend to the extent that is warranted by our clients and by our employers. Corporate governance, the increasing complexity of business organizations demands that governance function be resourced with a diverse array of skills. Strategic oversight and decision-making skills to be supported with individuals trained in a wide range of skills include law, technology, representative stakeholders, and diversity. The opportunity facing the profession is to be an active partner in developing and delivering contemporary governance practices to support the dynamic change of business. We need a broader range of individuals around the board table who are in touch with the changes that are unfolding. And finally, in leadership, as business landscape navigates through the next period of dynamic change, leadership of the process will be paramount. Professional accountants will be instrumental in how we respond to innovation, how we build new business models, and how we deliver the information to our clients and employers. The opportunity facing the profession is to integrate increased leadership training into our core competencies. Accountants will need the skills and expertise to anticipate the future resource allocation and new business strategies. They'll need skills and competencies in collaboration, networking, developing relationships with a broader range of stakeholders.
On behalf of us in charge and the people who've come along. So the opportunity is now before you to comment on what you've heard or raise questions with regard to our panelists. We've had an interesting range, all cited opportunities, and we'll follow up with a session or two to come on how to deal with those. But are there questions? Morley. Here's a microphone. So.
Sorry, this is directed to Sylvia, but I was wondering, you talked about privacy with respect to the EU, et cetera, but what about the situation that seems to go on and on and on of companies, employees leaving with knowledge and sharing it with a competitor, et cetera? Is that covered under the
Under the
Under the
European law,
EU.
or just, well, It is. So Article 32 is about security for processing, but it doesn't, in a granular way, prescribe that in terms of how to protect against that. But it does talk about integrity of the systems. It does talk about preventing unauthorized disclosure and misuse of the data. So what our cybersecurity teams have come up with is stronger rigor and security controls around our laptops, memory sticks, and the way you protect data, ensuring that, you encrypt it. And there are some policies that get implemented in terms of, what you can do at work versus what you can take home. And the banks are very, very, very good at this. For example, you can't even take a memory stick and put into a computer and download data because everything's tracked. So there's a bunch of tracking and monitoring that happens because the employer needs to balance the rights of what they need to do versus the privacy rights of the employee. So as long as there's transparency around the way you track your employees while they're working and, what you do when they're departing, I think that's the right approach to ensure that, IP and really important information doesn't leave the company.
If I'm working for a company, I've got information in my head, and so I go to Lyft, for example, from Uber,
Yeah.
and give them information that's going to be helpful to Lyft. That Uber, is there anything sort of dealing with that particular aspect about helping enforce the company's?
Well, that's
Protection.
interesting. It's interesting, especially when you see competitors going in between companies. What's written in a document or a piece of paper, it's easier to protect that with enhanced security controls in today's world. But what you can't really prevent from happening is what's up here in someone's mind. I mean, that I think belongs to the person, right? When you put it under a corporate brand, and maybe Ed can comment on this, it's proprietary to the company, but what's over here, you can't prevent that knowledge from being transferred to a new place. I mean, I've made a big switch in my career just recently, and what's over here, I use it all the time in terms of evolving and learning and making sure that I understand best practice and I understand new standards. But am I going to put it am I going to do a cut and paste and do about a risk methodology that I was using in my previous life? Probably not, but it's going to probably look and feel the same, but it won't be exactly the same. Ed, what do you think of that?
Well, it's not a new issue, and it's not really a privacy issue, but it's historically, companies have tried to deal with it by having non-competes in employment agreements. And I can tell you that they are the most difficult clauses in employment agreements to enforce. But every once in a while, they are enforced effectively, and an Uber to Lyft or a Pepsi to Coke situation is the kind of situation where those kinds of clauses will be enforced.
Ephraim, you had a question?
Yeah, this is a question for Ed. I was intrigued by your comment that there's a rapidly changing view of materiality. Some committees that I'm a part of are actually facing this, and I'd like to hear from you more about this rapidly changing view and what is it changing away from and what is it changing to? Because it's not often we have a luminary like yourself to expound on these issues.
Yeah, historically, materiality has been, as you know, it's a judgment call by management, but there are a bunch of legal shorthands that have evolved. 5% of various financial metrics is often cited as sort of a materiality threshold. When we move into a world where the metrics that matter the most, A, may not be financial metrics, and B, are probably forward-looking as much as historic. Concepts of materiality shift. So to give you an example that I'm thinking of, because and many of you in the room will know of it, I spent the better part of a year sort of working on saving a little financial institution called Home Capital. The Securities Commission took a very different view of materiality than management and the board, who were assisted by top quality law firms and accounting firms throughout the process. And at the end of the day, while the commission wouldn't articulate it this way, what the commission was looking at was a bunch of cultural issues that didn't reduce to any metrics that kind of management could look to. And what the company had to look to as soon as the commission took an enforcement action, materiality took on a completely different dimension, because materiality was all about the reputation of the institution and saving the institution. So ironically, once the enforcement action started, the company became much more conservative about disclosure than the commission. The commission kept saying, no, you don't have to make disclosure, and the company, I was advising the company by this stage, said, we absolutely have to make disclosure. We're talking about the life and death of this institution, and none of us are going to take responsibility for not making disclosure, where in hindsight, it's hard to say what disclosure might kind of, at the tipping point, make a difference. So that's a simple example, but you know, we're into a world where materiality, the judgmental nature of materiality has gone up highly, and going back to my remarks, I think that creates a bit of a tension with the accounting profession, which, because of very understandable liability concerns as a result of highly intrusive regulation over the last 2 decades, has become less and less willing to opine on issues that have to do with judgment. So it takes a real effort to have a constructive dialogue between the company and its accounting advisors on materiality issues today.
We've got just time for 2 more. Yes. We're delighted to have PhD students with us, so thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me. My name is Leigh Ellen Walsh. I'm a PhD student at York University. And my question is for Sylvia. When you were describing your work on privacy by design and kind of operationalizing those principles, you referred to kind of a tagline of privacy by default. And that struck me as interesting, because in my work, and another parallel movement is around openness and transparency, and under the tagline open by default, being open governments, open data, even open corporates. So I wonder if you can kind of comment on the tension or links between those 2 approaches to privacy by default as compared to open by default.
I think they're 2 different things, and the reason is because when we talk about privacy by default, it talks about putting control back into the end user, meaning that the default settings in a mobile app, for example, should be set to the higher standard, and then I, the end user, should be able to control how I want my default settings to appear. So if I want less privacy, I can adjust it. If I want more privacy, I can do that. But why should the default be at a lower standard where we're more susceptible to a privacy risk? Open government, accountability, all of that, that's one of the mantras of the GDPR and our privacy laws. You need to be open and transparent about information handling practices. So I think those are 2 very different concepts, but they're interrelated and they don't conflict.
I have 1 more, and it's Min Lei back there with her hand up. Yep.
Min Lei Ye, I'm an accounting professor at University of Toronto. So this is a general question. With the development of technology and artificial intelligence, students are afraid of losing their jobs as accountants. So what would you suggest professors to tell their students about this?
Sylvia, I guess you're up.
It's a fear, but I think that there's an opportunity. That seems to be the buzzword around here: risk management, an opportunity, privacy by design, opportunity, risk and reward. Yes, there's going to, with greater automation, there's that possibility that we will see a reduction in the workforce. But I think there's different ways of looking at artificial intelligence, and I think there'll be more opportunity to have human intervention, like ethical and data use committees. And now, again, I'm talking about it from my privacy world. When we look at artificial intelligence and the way it's being launched, we advise on a risk management approach where we say, the automation piece needs to be looked at. We will need more humans to strike committees. We will need more humans to have the ethical debate, to come up with principles and ethical guidelines and to live them and to practice them. So I think there's both risk and reward. There'll be an opportunity, but I'm not sure if that fear is as well-founded. I don't know, Ed, or even Bob. What are your perspectives?
On technology of the future. I'm looking for a succinct answer to your question, and from a governance point of view, I look at it as the importance of us having the skill sets to go forward. As students, I think the point I was trying to make is just that the paradigm of what is technology, how we use it as a tool, changes dramatically going forward, rather than sitting in an office with some pretty basic technology tools. We'll be needing to be mindful of how things are unfolding. And I'm sorry, that's not much more precise than what we're looking for.
Yeah, my bet would be, and it doesn't really matter what profession you're talking about, so law, medicine, accounting, auditing, there will be fewer opportunities at the base. That's where work will be displaced by artificial intelligence. But the opportunities and the ability to add value and to add value effectively at higher levels, which is what professions are all about, will increase. And again, that gets back to the exercise of judgment and why it's so important for professions to focus on that.
I'm going to close it off at this stage, and with a comment that it's interesting that these three panelists, who are really people who've contributed significantly to their professions and to ours, have chosen to speak about opportunities. And this last question that's come is an interesting one, because most of our students have focused traditionally upon a particular stream, an audit stream. And I think one of the challenges for us in academia and the profession is to make them see a broader range, to make them understand that the core of the profession is suitable to other opportunities. And so they shouldn't be as concerned about the audit element, perhaps 10 years from now, 20 years from now, as they should in getting a broader exposure. And but nonetheless, that would involve professionalism. So would you join me in thanking these panelists very much?